Hey, y'all, welcome back to another episode of the Chase Thomas podcast from still the aforementioned Chase Thomas coming to you live from Knoxville, Tennessee, Everything School HQ. We got a fun show for you guys today here on this Wednesday edition of the program. We've got someone who has been on the pod in many years, but he's someone I've read and listened to for many years as well on Shutdown Fullcast. One of my favorite college football podcasts out there that I know a lot of folks tuning in here. Is also a big fan of Ryan Nanni and all the good folks over there at the Shutdown Fullcast. One of the funniest and what many people forget, the only college football podcast out there. But before we get into my conversation with Ryan Nanni, where we talk about his 2024 Florida Gators, little Josh Heupel in Tennessee, conversation about his perspective on Heupel's rise and success at Tennessee, along with revisiting that 2019 LSU title season, along with some fan base trackers and stuff that Ryan learned on his new program and new podcast. We're not all like this. So it was fun to hear his perspective on what he's learned from all the great college fan bases all across the country. But before we get into today's episode, don't forget, folks, there's some housekeeping that I'd like to jump into before we get started on this Wednesday edition. Don't forget, folks, if you are, and I've said don't forget, folks, a lot. Don't forget did it again. If you are watching us on YouTube, thank you for checking us out on the video front. New episodes come out on this channel each and every day. You can subscribe if you're not already by hitting that subscribe button below. Liking this video also helps a great deal. Commenting below about the podcast and any thoughts you have on today's episode, more than welcome as we get closer and closer to 2,000 subscribers on the YouTube channel this week. Don't forget, folks, you can also, wow, why am I saying don't forget, folks, so much? You can also listen to this very program. And if you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or however you get your podcasts, thank you for checking out the show on that medium. You can subscribe to the podcast as well there. And if you already are and have not already done so, please hit that pause button right now and leave this show a 5-star rating and write us a review. It helps other people find the show, and it helps this very show continue to grow. You can email the program. So any questions for me, you can email me at chasethomaspodcast@gmail.com. And all the information about this daily program based out of Knoxville, Tennessee, that you have questions about or would like to learn more about the show, and get all past episodes, all that good stuff, chasethomaspodcast.com. Keep up with us on the socials, Pod Chase Thomas on Twitter. You can find me on Facebook, facebook.com/Chase Thomas Writer, and Instagram, Chase Thomas Podcast, and all that good stuff. But thank you, as always, for tuning in to this daily Tennessee Vols and National Sports podcast. I greatly appreciate it. And without further ado, Uncle Darren, let's go.
The Chase Thomas Podcast. My nephew needs me to record. See, I already hate it. I hate it.
All right, we're back here on the Chase Thomas Podcast. Where is that Ryan Nanni of Shutdown Fullcast? Is that the best voice in podcasting?
The most distinctive voice in podcasting. Let's go with that.
Have you been somewhere in New York, Ryan, where people are like, they do a double take? They're like, I know that voice anywhere. It's just like a Michigan undergrad who just graduated a couple of years ago, moved in the city, and they're like, Ryan Nanni?
I have never gotten that. What I have gotten is, this hasn't happened recently. On 2 different occasions, a stranger has heard me talking and has said, "Hey, will you record a voicemail for my friend as Charlie Day?" And I have obliged on both occasions.
What? Hold on. Can you do a Charlie Day?
Off the top, no, because I have to be in a bar and pretty drunk to have the confidence to do it, and now I'm not in that position. So,
I mean, it's a distinct voice. Like, is it weird to hear it back though? Because like, it's weird when you learn your voice.
Everybody though, right?
Yes.
Like anybody I think who works in a medium where even reporters who are listening to themselves on a transcript of an interview, like, everybody hates listening to their own voice. I'm convinced that even Whitney Houston probably was like, "Oh, I don't want to listen to this anymore" at some point.
I feel like Larry King liked listening back to it.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Like he was good. Like Larry King, I just could feel like he's like, that was a good interview. Like
James Earl Jones probably likes his own voice. He's probably like, yeah, that Mufasa. Oh my God, so good.
I forgot he was Mufasa. Is that dumb? Is that dumb that I just forgot that
No,
he was Mufasa?
It's not that important. Like, if I were to say of the things you need to carry with you at all times, James Earl Jones voicing Mufasa is not high on the list.
Yeah, it just doesn't really pop up there.
Okay.
Yeah. Wow, I just completely forgot about that. I just immediately go to Vader. This is why I'd be terrible at Jeopardy and like trivia and everything. And then that's the worst too. Like, sports. Are you a trivia person or no?
Like very casually. I'm not a trivia person in the way that like I would tell people about it online, because then real trivia people would be like, "Oh, really? Watch me destroy you," and I'm not interested in that.
And I don't ever want to like find out just how little about sports I know. Because if you tell people like you go to sports trivia night, because they're like, oh, you cover sports every day, like you'll be an ace in the hole.
Right.
You get in there, it's like, who was the 1973 Miami Dolphin left guard? You're like,
yeah, I got nothing. I got nothing. Yeah. Nobody needs that embarrassment.
But like Chris Chambers, great receiver for the Dolphins in early 2003.
People think of Wes Welker as a Patriot, but his work with the Dolphins deserves discussion. Yeah, exactly. What you are describing is the difference between trivia and remembering some guys.
Yeah, shout out to David Roth, because that's really what sports guys are, is we just like to remember some guys. Yeah. But when you're asking us to specifically remember someone on the spot, that's just a totally different gambit altogether. That's asking way too much.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Ryan, Nanni, good to see you, sir. Even though we're on enemy lines, and we're going to talk some Florida Gators here in a second. One of the things I was thinking about when you graciously agreed to come on the show tonight, Ryan, was that like, I don't know if you know Graham Coffey of Dog Central.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a good friend. So I told him that we were doing a pod tonight, and I told him, I was like, you know what's funny? I was doing like a Rolodex check, because we're now both seasoned capital S media veterans. And I was thinking about the different shows, because I have to be like, we're busy. The older you get, the less podcasts you can listen to. Like you just have to be more. I don't know, stringent and also
intentional. Let's say.
Yeah, intentional is the best word with what you listen to.
Yeah.
Because like I listened to, I think, the whole Grantland Rolodex in college, where I'm like, I have all day. Like I can listen to this. I can literally breeze through all of it. It's fine. I can't do that anymore. And I was thinking, like, what show have I listened to the most over like my adult life that I've had to awkwardly explain why I'm laughing in public? And Shutdown Fullcast is the number one show that I am. You might see me on a train. You might see me vacuuming my house, and I'm just awkwardly laughing to myself. Like I think that's Graham agreed that I think it's the funniest funniest podcast of my adult life. It makes me laugh every time.
We don't know what we're doing. We don't know why we're doing it, but I'm glad that people enjoy it.
I mean, the intros, your cold opens alone, they're some of my favorite things on the planet. Like, football season is just fantastic. Like, there's just nothing like it.
We aim to confuse, and I think we achieved that goal. I think the only advice I would give people is don't listen to it in a drive-through. I've heard many people say like, "Oh, I got a terrible look because you said something awful right as I was getting my Starbucks or my Burger King or whatever."
Yeah.
And don't listen to it at the gym. I've heard people who've been like, "I almost injured myself because I was trying to do something, and then Spencer said something ridiculous." So just don't do it in those two scenarios.
And then there's sometimes where you look over, because my wife's like, "What are you laughing at?" And I'm like, I don't know how to explain this one. It's like we all have that when we're scrolling through Twitter and something, and you're like, you laugh, and you're like, I don't even know where to begin with why this is funny, because I'm terminally online. That the only reason I think this is funny is years and years of being addicted to this terrible app that I know I get this bit, and if I explain the origin of this bit, you're going to be like, why? I shouldn't have asked. Like, I promise you it's not worth why.
No. We need like simple shorthand for that, because I get that too from my wife, where it's just like, oh, it's just online nonsense.
Yeah.
And then like we can move on. You understand where I'm at, and you understand that you don't want to be a part of this. You live a happier life than I do.
Do you miss being like kind of like, because you were an early Twitter, like a Twitter, I don't know, it was in your name, Celebrity Hot Tub.
Yes,
so,
sure.
I mean, do you miss like Twitter being a thing where you could get jokes off and there was a lot more of a community? It's more of a dead wasteland now. Like you and Network and guys like that of just people I looked at every day, and I was like, oh, what joke are they going to try and like drop on Twitter? And it's just kind of old.
So I think it's kind of a mixed bag. Like on the one hand, it's like I probably get more done in my life because I'm not on Twitter as much. But on the other hand, there is something kind of a bummer, because when it worked and when it worked well, like people talk about sort of like social media bubbles now and this, that, or the other. And without getting too far into it, it did feel like Twitter had a good, maybe shorter than I remember, run where it was pretty inclusive.
Yeah.
And like people of all stripes could sort of get in on it. And
celebrities on themselves.
Yeah. And it was, the vibe of it was mostly to have fun. I think where it took a turn was probably once it became like the whole who's the Twitter character of the day thing.
Yeah.
Like that became like hunting grounds for like, let's find the person with 27 followers who said the stupidest thing today and ruined their life over the next 36 hours. Like that probably changed it. But I don't know. Like we were talking before we started recording about sort of the strange history of being in sports media. I just chalk Twitter up as one of those things where it's like, we just got to move and you just move forward at this point. We're not rebuilding old Twitter.
No.
We're not rebuilding Grantland. Like these things are gone and we just got to figure out
what blogs happens. Are just gone.
The blogs are gone. They're not coming back. The blogs are not back in town.
I joked with Graham too about this, where I don't know if you thought about this. I mean, with Every Day Should Be a Saturday, because that's another site where I'm just like, hey man, that would be nice to have still. Like I shout out to Channel 6 and everything. But I mean, but it's not the same. Like I think they would say Spencer and Holly would say it's not the same. Like there was just something great about it. And I'm like, I would love to just bring back, like I'm the world's most boring billionaire potentially, if that ever happened, where some people are like, I'm going to buy it. Like I was in Maui this past week, Ryan, and I found out Larry Ellison owns one of the islands over there. Like he just owns an island.
Why not?
They're like, why do you need to do that? What? You just own an island?
That's something you do just to say you did it, right?
I guess, but here's the thing: is like my broader point is I would just restart like Grantland. I'd be like,
sure.
I'm just hiring Ryan Nanni. I'm bringing back Every Day Should Be Saturday. I'm bringing it I'm the world's most boring person. I'm like, I just like to read this stuff and I miss it. Like, hey, I'm bringing Sports on Earth back. Like they're like,
sure.
Eccentric billionaire brings back his favorite blogs.
I mean, I wouldn't rule it out. I maybe we're like just 5 years early for that to happen. Maybe just that billionaire class hasn't been created yet, and that will be the next weird thing that happens next.
That is a level of optimism. If we could do that, if I believe that that'd be the coolest thing. I understand this is very online to just suggest we bring all the blogs back, but I miss the blogs because like part of it, and I mean, we're doing a podcast. Like it's just kind of the medium's just switched a lot to there's just so many podcasts and people are finding a way. Cause like, that's what you're seeing is like, there's team blogs and stuff like that. Like the SB Nation blogs that were written 10 years ago are still popping up. There's popping up as podcasts and YouTube shows and everything like that. And it's good stuff. And it's just different. It's not the younger people's fault for pivoting that way. Like that's just where things have gone. But it's also like for us old heads, we're like, I'd rather be right. Like I want to encourage like the 24-year-olds, like, no, go do a blog. Go bring back Celtics Hub.
Do we sound like the people who are 15 to 20 years older than us who are like, bring back newspapers?
Yes.
I want newspapers back.
I mean, I don't know if I'd ever read the New Yorker without the print. Like the New Yorker, if they ever go digital only, I don't know what I'm going to do. Like
I mean,
nothing like a hard copy of the New Yorker. We're very old, Ryan.
I can't deny it.
Oh my God. Well, bringing it back to the full cast and everything else, I wanted to ask you about what has been your favorite season? Like if you had to reflect on your favorite season of doing Shutdown Fullcast, what season did you have the most fun doing the recap pods and just that weekly show? Which season gave you the most amount of joy and content and jokes off? Do you remember?
Gosh. The LSU national championship season, I feel like was really good just because that stands out because it was one that we were kind of stuck. If I'm remembering correctly, like we had come off a chain of Bama versus Clemson, meaning in the national title game over and over and over again. And it feels like even the other participants in the playoff at that point, it was like, okay, it's going to be Oklahoma and Ohio State.
Yeah.
Like maybe a Notre Dame gets thrown in there, but probably not. And having that LSU team sort of like throw everything for a loop, not just because it was a different team. LSU has won a national title that we had all seen before. LSU has churned out tons of talent into the NFL. It wasn't like so shocking. Oh my God, LSU won a national title. But like the resurrection, short-lived that it was, of Ed Orgeron's career. Joe Burrow going from Ohio State third stringer transfer to the year before just being like fine.
Yeah.
Not by no means was it like, oh, this guy's going to win the Heisman and he'll walk away next year. That's one that stands out as just like it had the right amount of sort of like variety and unexpectedness. And even that LSU team, while they were very good, they didn't feel like, oh, this like just maybe maybe until they got to the playoff, it didn't feel like, oh, well, just write the book already. This is already happening. The Texas game, even the Florida game they played that year, they were in plenty of fights. And
because their defense was terrible.
Yes, I mean their defense was spotty, I would say, because I would say last year's LSU's defense was terrible, and that was maybe the difference between the two of them.
But their offense was awesome too. Maybe this is a growing trend. LSU fans must hate this, right? Like, because I mean, you went to the national title game. I mean, obviously we saw like not crossing the 50. You've seen the opposite of that. And I don't know what's more fun. I think you would take the Joe Burrow, Jane Daniels.
I think you want. I mean, I think there are probably a few schools that aren't like this, but I think almost everybody would rather have the puncher's chance of like, if we can consistently put up 40 points, we'll at least be in a game at halftime. And then it comes down to things like, can we get a special teams play?
Right.
Can we get like a little turnover luck, something like this? If you can't get offense going and you're depending on other things to make it happen, you have like basically two paths to victory, and they don't look pretty.
It's why Vanderbilt, it's an actual felony. And I would make it a felony here in Tennessee that they hire a coach who doesn't run either the air raid or the triple. Like Jeff Monken not being the coach of Vanderbilt is insane to me. Like you don't get to run the Notre Dame Northwestern style in the SEC. That's never that's insane that we're still doing this again this year. Like what? There are some schools where you don't have a chance. Like Vanderbilt, like that's your only path is an air raid. Like Mississippi State's always gotten it. They're like, we have to do the run and shoot. Like Mullen and Leach, they understood the only way we can figure this out. Kentucky. They were like, we're gonna have to do an Iowa to ass team. Like we're just gonna have to make this as awful and unwatchable. No big plays.
But before that, like the Hal Mummy Kentucky teams were like, we have to throw things that you've never seen before at you.
We have two extremes, and that's the thing. You have to do one of those two extremes. You can't try and build like your Georgia and have the personnel like your Georgia. You can't do that. And so there are still some programs that fall into that trap, and you're like, what are you doing, man? What are you trying to do here? And that's honestly with Tennessee. I mean, there's a lot of people have a lot of takes on where Tennessee. What's your opinion of Heupel and watching Tennessee through 3 years here? Has it gone better than you thought it was based on when he was hired at the time in 2021?
I would be kidding myself if I didn't say yes. I mean, just on what they did 2 years ago alone, like that I think has to sort of qualify this as a successful hire. It has room still, I think, like to be a hire that's not right, and I can see a version of events where Tennessee has to make a different choice, but that doesn't make that doesn't mean Heupel was the wrong choice, if that makes sense. Like I think Tennessee has been vindicated in a decision that was not super popular at the time, was not super well regarded at the time.
People wanted Tony Elliott.
People wanted I think it was that Heupel. If I had to go back and sort of reconstruct it, I think there was a little bit of, we'd just seen Scott Frost leave UCF and do nothing. And so there was a little bit of like, well, aren't you just getting dollar store Scott Frost? I think there was a little bit of that. And there's a little bit of like, whenever you see an AD go get his old coach, if it's not a coach who's like super hot on the market, I think there is some element of like, is this just who you could get versus who you wanted? I don't know.
But Dan Mullen and Scott Strickland are still going strong at Florida.
We're going to get to Florida in a second. I'm going to answer your Tennessee question first. Yeah, I think like number one, Tennessee's just a lot more fun to watch than they were in the last conservatively 10 years before that. And I think that feels like the biggest accomplishment is that you watch Tennessee games now, whether you are a fan, a neutral, or someone who doesn't want to see them do well. And you have to admit, like, oh, this is a fun product that they're putting on the field. It's interesting to watch.
Are Florida fans becoming the Joker watching these Tennessee games, just enjoying the upset?
It's not quite that bad yet. It's not quite that bad yet. And I think Florida fans are too busy dealing with their own feelings to worry about Tennessee.
Wait, is there something going on at Florida that I'm missing?
There's so much going on. But here's the other thing. Like, I'm not trying to belittle Tennessee in this. Yeah. It's not necessarily that Florida fans are ignoring what Tennessee has accomplished, but we're in the middle of a 3-game losing streak to Kentucky, a team that we had a 30-year mortgage streak against before that.
I love that you're saying this because like Kentucky's making it look easy. What Tennessee has never been able to figure out, even in the like last year was horrific. That took years off my life. What I had to witness in Gainesville last year.
Yes. I mean, the Florida Tennessee game is frequently stupid.
Yes.
That one was especially stupid.
2 years ago, there were Tennessee fans. Like I'm in the building, like my wife and I, like Tennessee's up. It's comfortable. They have that great end of half run. They get a touchdown late and they score like, it's like, oh, I feel good. The Ramel Keaton catch happens. And you're like, okay, they're taking care of business here. They're a play away. Like Anthony Richardson had the ball in his hand to win at the end of the game. Onside kicks and everything else. It's like Tennessee barely escaped. So their fans, it's crazy that we're going into 2024 with all the questions of Florida. Tennessee fans are still like, I don't know. Like we haven't. I don't feel good.
Yes, but between Kentucky owning Florida out of nowhere, everything that Georgia has built, the way Georgia has completely flipped the Georgia-Florida rivalry. Florida State rising up from, it was like, no, you were down here with us, and now you're like have a legitimate case to be mad that you got left out of the college football playoff. Like Tennessee being better, it ranks on that list, but I don't know. There's so much, like I don't think Florida fans can focus on it. Let me put it that way. I don't think that's the thing that they can be like, this is the thing that's really making me craziest at this point in time.
What's funny too is like Tennessee all across the board, like obviously baseball just won the national title and it's everything's cool. Like what they're building is like this continuity where you have it. It's a special time. I've been telling Tennessee fans, like alums and like me being a lot, like I tell them like, enjoy this because this continuity with the president, the chancellor, the AD and the coaches all being this synonymous and being on the same page is a rarity. Tennessee has always been like that sleeping giant where if they can get everybody on the same page, good things are possible. But like, enjoy this. I don't know how long this is going to go. I don't know how long you're going to have Vitello, Barnes, and Heupel and just operating at this level. Obviously, they've got a good NIL program. Like there's a lot of reasons as to why Tennessee is running on all cylinders all across the board right now. But I think what's fun about Heupel specifically with this fan base and why it ended up being such a great match, and I'm curious if you feel the same, is that Tennessee's fan base is just one of the more rabid in college football. And obviously winning a Neyland and walking into Neyland, it's a different experience. It's a Coliseum. Like it's not just like a field. It just keeps going up. Like when you're a player, you walk in there and you're like, wow, this is out of Gladiator 2. Like this is a wild, wild field. And I think when you have Heupel's kind of aggressive, we're going to stretch it out to like, we're putting our receivers at the sidelines. We are going to stretch you out and make life really, really hard. And you have to make quick decisions and we're just going to beat you with speed over the top. And we'll see what happens. Like that's scary for most teams. But like, it's just, I think it meshes really well because it energizes the fan base. And I've been in so many of these games now with Heupel here where the fan base has never been louder. And I think it's just because you have this kind of excitement. And I just think it's so hard. It rattled A&M and Spencer Rattler, just like getting in his head when he was inside Neyland in the blackout and the dark unis last year. And I don't know. I just think it's a marriage that's really worked because I think the personalities mesh really well, where I think Heupel is extremely competitive and Heupel has an aggressive style offense and the fans are very aggressive and something about mustard bottles and golf balls. And like it's an aggressive fan base. So I think it just works all across the board.
I think you're right. And I think the other part of that is that I think Heupel somewhat fairly, maybe somewhat exaggeratedly, it doesn't really matter, has been an overlooked coach, has not been like all the attention that Lane Kiffin gets, to use that example, like has not been extended to Josh Heupel.
Yeah.
And I think my sense is that Tennessee fans really like having a guy who is their guy and is not the guy. And that's a little different. Like I think they have a greater appreciation for, we didn't necessarily get the best coach on the market, but we got somebody who is like really happy to be here and really happy to be with us and understands what we are about. The other thing I think Josh Heupel's done really well, a lot of offensive coaches they kind of, that becomes the whole brand.
Mm-hmm.
Tennessee's defense is still nasty.
Yeah.
And it has not been one of those situations where we're going to come in. Dan Mullen was a good example of this, especially in like the peak years where you'd be like, wow, this offense is like moving and we have a ton of first round, second round talent here. And the defense is not getting stops and the defense is not shaking people up. And I think that Tennessee has been able to really build an aggressive offensive identity without having to sacrifice, like, also we're really
the Lincoln Riley issue.
Yes. Yeah. Like that's a harder needle to thread than I think people realize, frankly.
And I think part of it too is like it's tough to get the elite of elite defensive coordinators for this style. Like, because you're going to give up a lot of points. You're going to look bad. Like, you're going to be a battering ram because your defense is going to be on the field a bunch more. Like, Tennessee plays with a fast tempo. Like, your guys are going to have to play a bunch of snaps. They're gonna gobble up yards. And Tennessee, like Tim Banks has been a good DC. Like, Heupel's hired well. Like, Rodney Garner is one of the best defensive line coaches in the country, and having him there is a big reason why James Pierce is maybe going number 1 overall next year. You have to hire well. And I think Brian John Marie has been a really good linebackers coach. He's now at Michigan. And I think you get William Inge, who has been a great DC at Washington. So he hires well. And I think he understands something that Lincoln, for some reason, just overlooked. And I think maybe part of it with Lincoln and Dan, and I think they're both great coaches, and I'm still a very pro Dan guy, is that it's just the friend thing with Grantham and Grinch. Yeah, the loyalty where you can't really have that. Like, you just, and I think that's the difference with Heupel versus those three. Because I don't think Inge and Banks had a relationship prior to Banks bringing him on. And like, just having those, like, obviously Heupel and Garner didn't have a relationship, but it's just hiring the best people you can and also understanding your weaknesses and limitations on the recruiting trail. Like, Brian Harsin doesn't realize, like, you see how Hugh Freeze immediately gets Auburn recruiting back on. It's like, you overthought it. Like, you needed, I understand you want to bring your Boise guys, but you need to have a balance. You need to have some, you bring in some, like, Billy Napier's even done that a little bit, where he has his offensive guys came in from Louisiana, but the defensive side, and there are some guys, like I think Gonzalez was a holdover, right? At wide receiver coach.
Yes.
So it's like you have to have that balance if you want to succeed in the SEC. You can't just bring your own guys.
Yeah.
Well, Ryan, speaking of Florida, I'm really curious because I got to tell you, I'm cautiously optimistic. Like, everyone's talking about the schedule this year with Florida. I think Graham Mertz is going to have a really good season. I think Eugene Wilson III is a really, really good player. I think he's going to have a breakout year if he can stay healthy. I think Montrell will be one of the better backs in the SEC, and not having to split time with ETN, I think we'll be fine. I think people are really overlooking them because of the schedule. Like, I would pick them right now against Miami at home to start the year. I think Miami's going to be a sexy pick. I'm like, I'll believe it when I see it. Like, it's just really hard to win in the Swamp, and Mario Cristobal in a big game out of the gate. Like, let me see it. I wouldn't be surprised if they won, but let's just see it.
Yeah.
But there's a strong chance Florida is undefeated going into Knoxville, and I'm going to just not be well all week long. And I think people are overthinking Florida a little bit. I think people are like 3-9. I understand the Vegas win total.
Yeah.
Are you talking yourself into Florida? Because I think 7-5 is actually more realistic to me than a 3-9 type year.
No, I think so. I think there is a weird split happening right now. And this is just anecdotal. I think there's the 3-9 crowd. I think that crowd tends to be a little bit more national than Florida fans, but I think there are Florida fans who are like, no, like, this is not working. We should have made a change already. We're doomed. I think there's another group of Florida fans that are maybe even a little bit more optimistic than you are, that are maybe thinking like, we're not going to go to the SEC title game. We're not going to beat Georgia, but like, we can win 8 games in the regular season. We can maybe push for 9. Like, I think they look at the schedule and they say like, we should beat Kentucky. We should beat Ole Miss. Like, whether or not these things are true, they look at last year and they say, you know, Florida State almost with a total like shell of a team, Florida nearly beat Florida State last year. So why can't we do it this year now that Florida State's lost all this talent? I think there is a different path where they sort of say, okay, 9-3 is on the table. The middle path that you're identifying is the one that I don't think anybody knows what to do with, because if Billy Napier wins 8 or 9 games with this schedule, I think he's fine. I think he's totally fine. If he loses 9 games with this schedule, I think he's done. Like, I think we're just, that's not going to work.
Yeah.
If you go 5-7, if anywhere between 5-7 and 7-5, I think you get into that weird, well, who did you beat and how did you beat them? Because the problem with the schedule to me is not necessarily the difficulty of it, because last year was pretty similar in that regard. It's the order of it. You are right that Florida could be undefeated entering the Tennessee game. Florida could, because the Tennessee game is weird, leave Knoxville 6-0.
Yeah.
And then they could drop every other game on the schedule after that. And that's, I think, what kills you is that sense that there is no momentum, and that I think weirdly you're better off going from getting to 6-6 from, well, we started the year 2-4, but we closed strong. Then we started the year 5-1, and then we collapsed down the stretch. And that's, I think, the problem that they have from a scheduling standpoint. It's just the messaging is going to be weird.
That's what helped Shane Beamer so much, was Beamer beating Tennessee and Clemson back to back to close the year, even though the year was awful.
Yes.
And they just had his great year, and then it bottom time. Like it was just such a great, the vibes have never been higher in Columbia.
Yes.
And that wasn't real. That was a little blip in the radar. And it was all right. Like, I actually think they're going to be pretty bad this year. I think they're going to be like 3-9. I think they're going to adjust. I think they're going to have to adjust in a very real way. I mean, I think most. What do Florida fans want, though? Do they want this all to work out with Napier and everything else, or are they ready to move on?
I think, if I were to guess, I think 80 to 90% want him to work, because I don't think there is a clear, well, we'll just go get this person.
Not Jed Fish?
I don't know why that would be the answer at this point. Like,
well, isn't it like his dream job apparently?
Sure. And Arizona was great last year, but like, I would like to see what happens with 1 year at Washington, for like it's.
I mean, he's building the Nepo Kings with Brennan Carroll and Steve Belichick. What more do you want, Brian?
You're right. I'm being, we had Charlie Weiss Jr. for a while, so I don't know why we shouldn't go back to that. I think Florida fans want it to work because it feels like it still potentially could. Like there have been enough glimmers of, Florida was in this game for X amount of time, or Florida didn't look completely outmatched by this team. The problem is that they are also matched with Florida barely beat USF a couple years ago at home.
Yeah.
Florida lost to Arkansas at home, a bad Arkansas team that didn't look happy to be playing football anymore. Like lost a winnable game there. So
lost to Kentucky 3 times in a row, which is insane.
3 times in a row. Lost to Vanderbilt. That gets buried in there too. Like I was in Ruby Falls when Florida lost to Vanderbilt, so I literally emerged from the underground to discover.
What's your 10-second take on Ruby Falls?
It's fine. If you're claustrophobic, don't go. I'll tell you that right now. If you're even a little bit claustrophobic, don't go into a huge cave under the earth. There were people there who didn't seem to grasp that concept, and I wanted to be like, it does what it says on the tin. Yeah. I don't know what you're mad
What did you think you were walking into here?
The laser light show is unexpected as well.
Oh my God. Is there part of you too? Like, I wonder if Florida fans, like I said, I'm definitely a proponent of Dan Mullen. I think he was largely good. I understand the recruiting issues that Florida fans had, but it wasn't as bad as people made it out to be. It was just not Urban Meyer level. And I think one of the things about Florida that's always kind of, they're not this, it's not quite identical to Tennessee, but the thing about Florida is when you go back to their history, as you know, it's Urban and Spurrier. Everything else is a disaster. Pretty much, everything else is just not great elite football. Like it feels like it's like Texas in a way, where Texas fans see themselves as the same history as Oklahoma, and you have to pull them aside and be like, no. Oklahoma has been really good and had multiple championship windows. Like they're winning a title every decade. They're going to the college football playoff consistently. They're putting out Heisman guys every few years, like Hall of Fame coaches. You're not that sustainable, great juggernaut. Like you feel like you are, you have your network, but it's not really been that way year over year. It's kind of a weirdly hard job that you don't understand why they make it so hard, right? So like Florida just makes this way more complicated. Like they're recruiting better than Tennessee still, and you're not even winning games. Like, it's just, people are like the recruits are like, just be good and like, give us a reason and we'll come. A lot of us are here. It's so frustrating.
Here's the tricky, your analysis is not wrong. And there are plenty of other schools where you can find, like UCLA compared to USC. It's like on a football basis, this is entirely lopsided. And the idea that you think your history is the same is just not accurate. But here is the problem. The phenomenon you are describing is exactly the same of Florida's two in-state rivals, Florida State and Miami. These are also schools that for years were nothing. These are not schools that have histories dating back into the 50s and 60s of going to the Rose Bowl and this, that, and like these are new money schools in the terms of college football. And that is who I think occupies the most brain space of Florida fans. Tennessee matters, Georgia matters, the SEC matters, and these aren't SEC schools, obviously, but in terms of who you see and work with and who you are being a dick to online, it's Florida State and Miami fans. And because they operate in this same way, I think it's less about like, we are entitled to this because we have this deep, rich history, and more, we are a Florida school and we are all get rich schemes that can work. And if they're not working, we need to try another one.
I just feel like, and I wonder if there's buyer's remorse. I kind of want to do some polling. I want to do some reporting in Gainesville of like, what if you could have just talked Dan Mullen into hiring like Pete Golding? Like, how much better would this all be right now? It's like, he really understood offense. He's a top 3 offensive mind. Those guys are hard to find. Where Dan Mullen's just solid. He got Mississippi State to number 1 overall. Just one of those where it's like, I understand you didn't enjoy the last year there, and it got kind of ugly and down the stretch and kind of embarrassing. But like, the guy also beat Georgia and whipped Georgia. Was the last team in the regular season to whip Georgia with the wheel routes of Kyle Pitts over and over and over again. Like Dan Mullen, the best version of Dan Mullen was still really, really good. And I just wonder if like that's one of those where both sides are like, we probably should have just stayed together and figured it out.
To me, the trickiest what if about it is that obviously recruiting was a big reason why. Dan Mullen was.
But people act like it was like he was recruiting like Iowa. Like these are like 13 classes. Like they're not great.
But this is the trickiness of being in the SEC is you can have a top 20 recruiting class and that can be a failure. In certain circumstances. But to me, the interesting question is all of that happens right before NIL. How much does it change how Florida can operate if they're like, look, we don't need you to go into mom's kitchen and tell her how good this roast is. We just need you to point them in the direction of the money. The legal and above board money at this point. Like that's I think the interesting what if. The other thing that like I try to remember, because I think this is true of every college football fan base who's mad about their station. This is true of Spurrier. This is true of Meyer. Your best years always correlate with your competition having down stretches. Florida is a little bit of an exception with Spurrier because obviously like Florida and Tennessee were going at it in some really heightened ways, but those are bad Georgia years for the most part. Like Georgia is not a relevant player at the national level at that point. When you get to the Meyer years, Tennessee is having a terrible time for the most part. And I think this is true of most places. Like there's a zero-sum game quality to this, and Florida has to, it's less like how can Florida surpass Georgia and how can Florida put itself in a position to take the crown if and when Georgia stumbles, which they eventually will. I don't know how long it's going to be, but it will happen. Every program we've talked about on this, tonight, however long we've talked about them, has had that point where it's like, oh no, it stopped working and we had to figure it out.
I like it. We'll end it there. So final thing, you have a great podcast, Ryan Nanni, where you deep dive into different college football fan bases called We're Not All Like This. You have Indiana, you have Syracuse, you have Kansas, this and the other. So I encourage folks to go check that out. My question to you as we wrap up here tonight, which fan base were you most surprised to learn about, and which one changed your mind the most on how you perceive that fan base now?
I think Gonzaga was the one that I was most surprised to learn about, just because I really had no big preconceived notions. I had a lot of thoughts about the basketball program, but
you might say you had a few thoughts on Gonzaga.
You are old. You're right. But I hadn't really, they're obviously Gonzaga fans online, but I've never known them to like, they haven't done enough to me where I've like really formed a big opinion of them. And getting a sense of like why people go to this school, what they like about it, what's sort of like meaningful to them, how basketball plays into all of that was just, it felt interesting because it was probably one of the few episodes where I didn't bring a lot of my own baggage to it. And I could just sort of come in as a curious outsider and be like, what's all this about?
Hold on, did you have a lot of baggage on the Hoosiers? You were coming in, you're like, I'm ready. I have some Indiana takes. Antoine Randall, overrated.
Wait. Have you ever dealt with Indiana fans on Twitter?
They don't exist.
They do exist. They listen. They are not mighty in number, but they are loud and they are a little bit scary. The ones who are there. Yeah. I would actively dispute that Indiana fans, they're just they're working through their own things. Let me put it that way.
There was an Indiana dad I remember meeting. He's like, hey, IU guy. And it was just, everything was basketball. And I'm like, can we talk about something in the last 25 years?
Like, absolutely not.
It's over. Like Tom Coverdale not walking through that door, man.
South Carolina might be the one that I think I have had the most different understanding of after talking to, because I guess I had in my mind, like, South Carolina fans are the people who every year, like, this is it. This is the year we make the jump and we prove that we belong not only in this conference, but at the top of this conference. And I feel like I don't think I've made that up, but I feel like South Carolina is, of the SEC's middle class, one of the most dissatisfied to be there. But talking to South Carolina fans, I think it was more like there was a little bit more realism than I expected. And I think there was more appreciation for what they have and what they have that's good. Like, obviously, women's basketball is a thing.
Yeah.
They are super stoked to be enjoying. The baseball team winning a national title not that long ago, that was like huge for them. And I think they are not as tortured by what could be as I assumed they were. So I was probably projecting, as it turns out in that case.
The meanest thing I can say about the South Carolina fan base is, and like, this is a take that I actually do agree, like, believe in, like the Spurrier years. Like, I don't think you're going to do better than what Spurrier did when he was all the way locked in and cared in South Carolina. I think they should just it should be the retirement home for great Florida coaches. Like, that should just be their brand. Like, Dan Mullen should actually be the South Carolina head coach next year. And that should be their bit.
He'd probably do great.
He would do great.
Like, that's the nice thing is, like, is this a 5-year plan? No. Can we get like 2 really good years out of 4 out of this? Yeah, probably. You're probably going to have like 1 10-win season where you make everybody else's lives miserable. And
correct.
That's a good brand to have.
And it makes the AD's life a lot easier. Just like, you don't have to go do any searches. You just wait for the call from Scott Strickland, and he's just like, we're ready. He's ready to retire on Hilton Head.
We're gonna listen. We're gonna eat 80% of the cost. We understand how this works. We just want you to treat him well.
Seriously, like, isn't that a great thing? I think that's what I would do.
It's not the worst plan, and it would probably be better than South Carolina trying to fend for themselves constantly.
Right?
Yeah.
Stop trying to be Georgia, like hiring Georgia people. Yeah. Stop trying to, like, this isn't going to work. Just hire the Florida guys.
Like, the retired Florida coaches. Do they have to fail in the NFL first, or can we skip that step?
It's up to you. That's the fun part.
Okay.
That's the fun part.
Do you remember when Dan Mullen was being floated for the Cowboys job? That's a real thing that happened in our lives.
Also, but I got pushback. I actually made this whole case about like why Dan Mullen should actually be the next coach of South Carolina. South Carolina fans are like, no, we got to. Do you really think it wouldn't be an upgrade? Do you really think Dan Mullen would not be good at your school? Dan Mullen would not, like, the expectations there. Like, he got Mississippi State to #1 overall. I don't think you understand. Dan Mullen will be fine at South Carolina.
There is one thing that will trip it up a little bit.
Okay.
Steve Spurrier, obviously an East Tennessee boy, like being in South Carolina.
Napier.
So being in South Carolina is not like a big leap for them.
Yeah.
Dan Mullen is from New Hampshire. Like, there is always going to be a little bit of a culture clash. And I think that would be the tricky part, is there would be some part of the South Carolina fan base that was like, carpetbagger. Absolutely not.
We'll end it there, Ryan. What can the good folks check out from you over at Shutdown Fullcast this week and everywhere else?
We just recorded today, so I should remember what we talked about. I know it was a little bit of everything, including the football game. I know what we did. We went through the University of Florida's dorm list for what you should pack for move-in, and we told you what you don't need, and the answer is most of it. The University
What's the
of Florida,
number one thing? Spoiler alert. What's the number one thing you don't need?
I think the most surprising thing was pencil sharpener. You don't need a pencil sharpener in college.
I haven't used
Get
a
out of here
pencil.
with that. Yeah.
Do you still use pencils at all? Like, I don't. And you also do mechanical if you're doing anything. You're not doing.
Yes. You don't listen. They also said toolkit, which was a creepy one. That's one where I'm just like, don't show up freshman move-in day with your random roommate and be like, don't worry, I have wrenches. Like, that's not the message.
I mean, even just walking into your room, like if you go in, or your bunkmate has a toolkit, you're calling home.
Right,
you're like, Mom?
right. I'm gonna die here. There is nothing that you should face as a freshman in college where your answer is, I should fix this. That's not the answer.
Yeah. No, it's never going to happen.
No, so I don't know what the University of Florida.
I can't believe they're pencil sharpeners.
Toolkit. First aid kit's on there.
You sure you didn't read the 1973 move-in kit?
I swear to God, it was 2024. Flash drive was on there too. I don't know what that's for. We decided that might be code for vape pen though. So
vape pen.
Yeah.
They're encouraging kids. Don't forget your vape.
Don't forget your vape. It's Florida. It could make sense.
They're just getting you ready for Florida, man. That's so funny. Don't forget your vape pen.
We don't want you to feel left out. So yeah, that's the kind of high-minded college football insight you'll get at the Shutdown.
I have this vision in my head of like orientation and just this cloud of smoke. Go Gators. Oh my God. Ryan, Nanni, thank you so much for the time. I greatly appreciate it. Go subscribe, Shutdown Fullcast, and also go listen to listen to Ryan talk about fans like Indiana that apparently have fans. Like they're
gonna come for you now, Chase. I can't stop them.
Yeah, no, we're not all like this, as the name in the show says. So Ryan, Nanni, thank you so much. We'll have to do this again soon.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, man.
Nicely done, nephew. The Chase Thomas Podcast. Hell yeah.